Hi, I'm Noam Wasserman, Dean of the SciSim School of Business at Yeshiva University. I was a longtime professor at Harvard Business School, an entrepreneur, and a venture capitalist. I wrote the bestseller, The Founder's Dilemmas.
And I'm Charlie Harary. I've been working with companies for over 10 years. And that book, The Founder's Dilemmas, and the challenges faced by the 10,000 founders in it is the basis of this podcast. We are delving into the issues faced by startups to help you avoid the pitfalls that claim so many good companies.
Let's get started.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Founders Dilemmas podcast. It's great to be with you again. Great to be always with the Dean. Very exciting episodes coming up. So, Dean, what do you have for us today?
So, Charlie, some unique content and styles that we're going to have for what we anticipate will be the next 3 episodes. I'll give a little bit of background right now on where it is coming from, and then what we're going to do in each of these 3 episodes. One of the things that we like to do is take a lot of the content of what we have learned about the best practices around founding and how to be able to bring that to founders is the core of the podcast that we've been doing now in season 3. However, there are other key parties that can benefit from the knowledge that we've gained about what separates success from failure and the key decisions and how to make them better. And one of those parties is the investor side, the people evaluating founders, evaluating startups, deciding whether to put their money in. And then after they put their money in, mentoring and guiding the founders through the ways in which they can make better decisions, the ways that they can involve people better.
Right.
And so we bring the content, not just having it here on campus at Yeshiva University for our students through our courses and through our experiential parts of what the students are able to do, but also we bring it to people who are right now either founding or investing out in the world, and we go and do it off campus and bring it to them. One of those is my founder bootcamp, where it's targeted at bringing in 30 current founders where they can learn in a day what are the best practices and what are the biases that they're not tuning into, that they can be able to think in a different way about the decisions that they are making. Another one, and this is what we're going to be heading into, is an angel investor bootcamp. Angel investors are the people who are investing their own money in startups. They are interested in being able to both foster the next generation of startups, but also maybe make some money off of doing it, and bringing them in to learn some of the lessons that others have learned. Also, as we'll see a consistent theme through some of the episodes that we're going to be doing now, some of the best practices that they can learn from professional investors, in particular venture capitalists, the people who get the most attention. What are the things in a day that we'd be able to teach them? We originally, you might remember, were going to be doing this back on March 18th, 2020. Unfortunately, COVID hit 2 weeks before. We ended up having to cancel that Angel Investor Bootcamp. It was very generously going to be hosted by someone who is a trustee of YU and a professor in SciSims named Phil Rosen at his firm Weil Gotshal. And unfortunately, I had to drop Phil a line and say, Phil, we're not going to be able to do it. And He said, anytime that you can re-ramp it up, we're game. And so almost exactly 3 years later, in March of 2023, we went back to Weil Gotshal and we were able to ramp it up. And I did the morning on team and founder issues that angel investors should be cognizant of and be looking for when they're evaluating those teams. In the afternoon, a partner in crime in multiple ways, Bruce Tarragon, the first ever, and a great trivia question for this, he was our first ever student council president at SciSims.
Wow.
And then also now he is a star venture capitalist at Bloomberg Capital. And he is also a professor teaching our students about angel and venture capital investing. And so he did the afternoon on financing and legal things that angel investors have to be cognizant of. In between, to give me a little bit of a break, Charlie very generously also volunteered to be able to run a panel, be able to moderate a panel of 3 people very experienced in this domain. 2 of them from the investor side, though actually one of them was a founder and then moved to investor. The other one more of, if you will, a pure investor. And then the other one is a very intriguing founder who has raised, as you'll see, loads of angel money, though actually more of the number of angels in terms of what he's done.
Yeah,
rather than the
crazy amount of angels is incredible.
Yeah, and so we'll be able to learn from these 3 very different perspectives and a lot of the lessons that they have learned along their journey. And so we're going to be playing the recordings that we have directly from that panel. But then afterwards, when we have some thoughts, we're going to hop in and be able to highlight things for people and be able to have a little bit of a dialogue about some of the things that you were able to draw out during that panel.
Right.
Big picture, the things that struck me, just to set a little bit of the table, throughout the rest of the podcast, we've been focusing on how human founding is. A bunch of the things that go into the biases that harm decision-making, the head versus heart, and when they're grappling with those, and how we can be able to take Steve Jobs's guidance to follow your heart, but check it with your head, the perils of conflict avoidance. These are themes that will also be very much a part of how human investing is. And so that's going to be a recurring theme that we're going to be able to see. There's also some things, as I already mentioned, about the best practices. If you are an angel investor, being able to take some of the best practices from venture capitalists who focus on this professionally, who do this a lot more in volume, and what are the things that you might be able to learn from that. But also one of the critical things is, even if you're a founder, understanding the investor lens is a critical thing. Understanding how they're going to scrutinize you, understanding what kinds of things they might be able to see that you don't. And even if you haven't taken investor money, being able to put on the investor lens is going to be critical. But then also, if you're heading out to raise investor money, being able to put it on is going to be pretty key for you to understand them. And so those are some of the cross-cutting things that you were able to draw out during the panel that we're going to be listening to.
Great. Okay, thank you, Dean. We're excited for this panel. Let's begin by asking our panelists to introduce themselves and sort of a high level of their experience, and then we'll jump right in with questions. We've got a whole questions prepared, but ultimately, if people want to ask questions themselves, feel free just to raise your hand, and we'll be able to sort of interact that way as well. So let's begin. Kumesh, you want to begin with a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully this is on. Hey guys, I'm Kumesh Aroomoogan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Accern. I've been doing the company for about over 8 years now. It's been a lot of hustle and crazy fun journeys, but we raised about 40 million so far from VCs. Yeah, we're trying to scale up, and it's a good time, but obviously the market dynamics and everything that's happening is just going to make you stronger. So, but yeah, that's a little about me.
Cool. Mic check in back. Raise your hand if you can hear me in back. Okay, we're good. I'm Andrew Ackerman. My background makes almost no sense. I was in consulting, then a 2-time startup founder, family office, an accelerator / VC fund, and now a whole bunch of everything. We can go into more detail as the panel goes along, but that's enough for now, I think.
Okay.
Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon. Moshe Neuman from Brooklyn, New York. Heard of that? So I've been involved in tech for the last 10 years. Before that, I've been involved in real estate, but it wasn't something I enjoyed. I find myself every day on TechCrunch. Everyone asks me, how do you become a religious Hasidic guy, and how do you get to technologies? But I find myself every day on TechCrunch, and I figured this is where I want to make a living off. So I started to meet investors and companies. Over the years, I've been involved in around 50 companies, from investing and doing business development and helping the founders. I've been involved with Kumesh, been involved with Andrew, and the ecosystem is something I enjoy. I'm looking forward to doing it for 10 years, and I'm just beginning. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll start with the first question. There's an expression out there, you bet the jockey, not the horse. Is that real? How important, when you look at an opportunity, how important is the actual opportunity, the business, the tech, the technology, versus the people behind it, the founders?
I mean, I made this mistake all the time. Like I used to watch a lot of horse racing as a kid, bet on it. I've never seen a horse win a race without a jockey, and never seen a jockey running without a horse. So it's kind of a false question. You need them both. I've been guilty over the years of falling in love with either the jockey or the horse and hoping it would be enough. That's never worked. So it's got to be both.
The people are most important. It's like real estate, location. It's people. It's the team, it's number one. I sometimes overlook and even do a different sector or I'm not so familiar with if I like the people, the founders. Especially the older you get, you want to spend time with people you enjoy, they give you good energy. So I think the people, it's the most important thing.
Yeah, I mean, I would just double that. It's the people, especially the experience, the hard experience, because obviously when you're starting a company for the first time, you're all excited and everything, but you haven't been through that rough path of all the downs. And of course, you can accelerate that with accelerators and so forth, like Dream It, Y Combinator, and so forth, but it's only going to accelerate a certain amount of experience. For the personal experience, you actually have to go through that much longer. So yeah.
So let's double down a little bit. I want to get a little bit deeper into what that means. A lot of times founders are charismatic, they tell good stories, they have great pitch decks, they've told the same story to 50 people 100 times, and so they're smooth as silk. And so it's hard to get a sense of who they are when you meet them. And many times the way your entry point is before the crisis, before the liquidity issues, before the market goes in the wrong direction. So what specifically do you look for? What are the traits? What are the characteristics? Like, what in particular are you looking for to determine whether the person in front of you is a founder you want to bet on?
I need to feel that the founder is going to execute no matter what it takes. I'll give you some examples. I will test the founder, how he responds. I try sometimes to make it difficult, where to meet and how to meet, and see how he responds. I'll give you an example. That's why some Israeli founders, if I tell them Thursday, come to New York, they fly over and be Sunday to meet me. And some founders here locally, it's going to be difficult for them to meet. They want some convenience. That's a founder. They won't be able to execute a company if they find some obstacles. So how they follow up, and it's interesting, there's a different perspective you usually don't hear. I asked God this morning to give me some good words to be able to give some advice. And I read today from King Solomon, from the morning from Chok, that he said that you should never eat from a people who is not willing to give it for you 100%. Ayin Ra. No, don't eat from someone who's not giving you. The same thing is the founder shouldn't be selfish. I think it's important. Should be willing to share the wealth. Sometimes you meet some founders, you're gonna feel they feel so bad, they need to give away a little bit of the company. So I think this is another important aspect that the founder should be like willing to share, not to be so. So the same thing. If someone is selfish, it's gonna be issue with the employees, gonna be with issue with investors. It's also an important point. And the founder should be able to handle stress well, because there's going to be a lot of stress on the way.
So, the truth is, after a while, it becomes like pattern recognition. Right? If you read Malcolm Gladwell and Blink, after a while, you can kind of just look at somebody and you get that sense right away. But to try to kind of break it down into the kind of the tells that I've looked for over the years, when I'm looking at a founder or a team slide, the things that give me the most comfort are prior startups. Even if they weren't successful, like it's nice, they learned on someone else's dime. I also like to know prior sales experience. It doesn't even have to be startups, but I do believe there's something in a person's DNA about asking someone else for money. Some people just don't have it. I remember there was one guy we interviewed. We asked him what his first entrepreneurial activity was. We were getting a bunch of I had this paper route as a kid or what have you. He said in 5th grade he noticed that a lot of his buddies were coming to school without pencils. So he bought a box of pencils and he rented them out for $0.05 a day. So when he was out of the room, I turned to the other guy on the selection committee and I said, I don't really like what he's doing now, but I'm going to back one of his startups eventually. I wish I'd kept in touch. So, prior ability to sell, that's a big piece of it also. And the other one, and I wish I could remember who told me this because it's a great phrase, I look for founders with well-reasoned but loosely held opinions. Like I want them, so why are you using that go-to-market? Or, why are you pricing it this way? Or, why do you want, this channel? And I'll listen and I might push back and, to probe on it. And if they have the logic is good, but if I ever get to a point where hey, these numbers don't add up, they should be willing to say, that's absolutely right. Facts are not what I thought the facts were. I'm just going to move on. You don't want someone who's a weather vane and just the last person they talk to is the opinion they have when they come to you. But you also don't want someone who's fixed and rigid and will insist that they've got to go in this direction when all the evidence is telling them that's not the path forward.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say probably one of the easiest ways looking to see if they did a previous startup before, and especially if they were the CEO and the founder, because you could probably be the chief product officer or some other executive role at a startup, but it's not the same experience as if you were the CEO, because that's all fundraising and so forth. They can bring their experience previously to the new company and just accelerate things from there. And I would just say probably if they didn't do a startup, understanding what were some of the most painful experience they've had previously, and how do they manage stress while staying at 100%. Because it's very hard to stay at 100%, super laser focused while everything is crumbling from the top. So, and it's very difficult to figure out how to do that too as an investor. But yeah.
Oh, okay. There's one other phrase I love to hear. I taught myself. Yeah. Right. So, like, if you're hiring when you're in the startup side, you're hiring someone technical or programmer. So, why are you using this tech stack? It's like, well, my experience was X, but I was reading that this is a better fit, so I taught myself. Kotlin, whatever it is that makes sense. I just love that. I love hearing that.
Yeah. As investors, I'm sure you've made mistakes, invested in things that you regret. Share with us maybe the mistake that taught you the most throughout your career that maybe you use going forward that guides your decision making now.
You want to go first this time?
You go ahead.
Oh, sometimes I like going last for a change. When you said you make mistakes, I'm like, yeah, get comfortable. We got a few. We're in a crazy business, right? If a third of the investments I make go to zero within a year, I'm doing really well. Just take a moment to dwell on how effed up that is, right? That's firing at any other job, which makes it hard as an investor, as an angel investor or VC to really learn, because your learning curve is so flat. It takes so long to know if you've made the right decision or not. But sometimes you know it right away. And it's actually most of the time been around the founder. My biggest mistakes are always when I fell in love with the business and I overlooked reservations about the founder. And the one that I'm thinking of right now, and I will not name names, though I'm so tempted. It was one of the founders who heard what he wanted to hear. He'd done a prior startup, so that was good. Super deep ties in the industry. When he showed me his traction slide, you hear the people that he's already sold to in a prior startup, 6-figure contracts or more. Super impressive. He kind of had a little bit of the I know the way to do it, and didn't respond well to well, if X is wrong, what would you do? Right, so it was a little bit firmly held opinions. That was my first alarm. But then as we started going through, there were things that I would help him with, and he heard what he wanted to hear. He's like, but you said you were going to invest, and I told everyone you were going to invest in the next round. And I said, but that's not a decision we've made yet, right? And I told you I'd come on the panel, and I can say that we intend to invest, but that decision hasn't come before the investment committee before. And there was a series of things like that. Of all the founders I've worked with, whether they've succeeded or not, he is one of the very, very few that I'm not on good terms with. Sorry to bring you down.
It's my fault. I asked the question.
Listen, we learn more from when we get hurt than we do when things go well.
Yeah. Moshe?
As I would say 2 points that I will be careful in the future is one is don't fall for FOMO. It's especially when there's some big names, they throw big names on you. This guy invested. And I would change it to ROMO, instead of FOMO, basically relax of missing out. So I think, and that's one point. And the other one is companies that need a lot of capital to continue, capital intensive, I would stay away from that because they have a bigger chance to fail. So even companies that have billionaires backing, and I did some of those companies, but didn't realize how much capital they need, especially if there is a recession, it takes things to stay longer, they could go under. So just focus on what you point and the founders and how they're going to make money. If it's a big market, if they succeed, So don't look at so much who else is involved. So it could be your first check, don't care so much. It helps, but you see FTX with Sam, these guys, the biggest guys been involved, and that company, I'm sure they did diligence, but it was FOMO. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been building for, I don't know, last 10 years. Haven't been investing, but I just started investing, I would say a few months ago, and I'm trying not to make mistakes. And the way I'm trying not to make mistakes is investing in things I really know. And that's really focusing on the industry you spend your years in. So like for me, it's fintech and AI. And so I know that space, and that's kind of how I avoid a bit of mistakes. And also looking at the founders and seeing, am I seeing them in myself, like, 5-6 years ago? Are they a little naive and so forth? So those are the ways that I'm looking at to avoid a bit of mistakes when I'm investing.
But just to be totally clear, if you invest and the company doesn't succeed, I don't consider that a mistake. Like, that's the business we are in now. Yeah. There's a certain irreducible amount of risk. What I consider a mistake is when you're looking back and you can say, knowing what I knew then, I made the wrong decision, right? Like, how many people here play blackjack? If you don't split aces and eights, you've made a mistake, right? If you still lose despite doing it, you didn't make a mistake.
Speaking more about the idea of, I guess, navigating the emotionality of drop, difficult conversations. It's always great when things are going well. Who doesn't want to put their arm around someone and say, we're doing it together? But sometimes the market goes into the wrong directions, or sometimes you see them sliding past real problems. You see in them behaviors or actions that are going to only hurt the business later on. What is the relationship that you have, and I guess I can look at this from both sides really, between founder and investor when you have to have difficult conversations to guide them, to call them out, to deliver bad news? How do you navigate that? Do it too late and it may be too late? Do it too early, it may blow up a relationship? How does that work?
A lot of founders are wary to give you anything other than great news sometimes. And eventually there will be a tough moment. And then they come to you and it's like, hey, we got 3 months of runway left. I'm like, well, there's not a lot I can do in 3 months. So it's on you guys, because usually you're more experienced than the founders will be. I would say go out there in the very beginning, just make them comfortable bringing you bad news. Right? Just stress the fact that, hey, I don't make money if you don't make money. I can help you the most if I know things the soonest. So I want you to be comfortable bringing me stuff that's, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And not everything that's bad is your fault. And you will make mistakes, so it may be your fault, but you're learning, so that's also not really your fault if you had a good reason for making that. Like I said before, you split your aces and eights, it didn't work out, okay, you move on. But I would say early on, do your best to make them feel comfortable doing that. And then, of course, the moment they bring you bad news, don't jump on them, right? That's what you can do from your end. The hardest conversation I ever have with founders is if they are hitting a rough patch and I can't bridge them. Like, there are some times where they hit a rough patch and you can bridge them a little bit, help them make payroll for a month or two. You have a lot more leeway to do that in some circumstances than others. But sometimes you'll look at it and you're like, hey, between your seed round and your A round, we wanted to prove that your selling economics could work, right? We knew you had product market fit. We just needed to make sure that you have a repeatable sales process, and you're running out of money. And I don't think we've proven that yet. And I don't think we're actually closer to that yet. I can't put more money in it. As opposed to I see we're making progress, you just need a few more months, I'm happy to bridge you. But being able to tell somebody I know you need the money and I know you're going to hit a wall and I just can't write you that check, that's personally the hardest conversation for me to have.
For me personally, regarding emotion, the minute I write a check, for me it's like the money's gone. So I never get attached emotionally to it. and I will never waste time if it doesn't go right. I give my 2 cents, never push a founder, and never waste my good energy and good time on something that didn't go well. I'd rather move on, go to the next one, and spend time with founders I enjoy spending time with.
Yeah, I would say from a founder's perspective, being transparent from day one, it just helps because now you're comfortable being transparent with the VCs or the investors. But usually most of the time, whenever there's bad news, it has to do with money. And so when you go to your investor and there's bad news saying that you're running out of runway, you kind of want to, you don't want to phrase it like that because you know that he's not going to, that the investor's not going to give you money. So you're trying to figure out ways to sugarcoat it in a good scenario, and that always ends up bad. So it's a little balancing act there from a founder and investor perspective. How do you balance it? How do you balance the news saying that, all right, I'm running out of money, but if I can get this much capital and I can hit this and this milestone, that'll be great. So kind of like storytelling, but also it would be great if some of the VCs as well understand that it's not just about giving money, but also thinking of creative ways on how you can actually get money into the company from AR financing, debt financing, invoice financing. There's a lot of different ways aside from equity capital that you can introduce the startups to. And there's a lot of different types of money out there, so yeah.
Okay, that was awesome. So Dean, give us your initial feel.
Absolutely. Loads of notes that I took throughout the dialogue that you sparked. Let's go through a few of them and hop in wherever you want, Charlie, to
Totally.
Be able to add the color commentary. Interesting divergence that we had, in particular between Andrew and Moshe. So the two investor sides of it, when it came to your jockey versus horse question. Andrew was very much the wanting everything. It's important to be looking. You can't fall in love with either the founder or the startup and be able to value both. I'll have a comment later on about taking the chain with its links view of things. If any one link is weak, then he's not going with that chain or anything like that. Moshe was people, people, people. Moshe was in some ways at the core of when we framed it, our first episode of this, the research that shows that of the startups that fail, 65% of the reasons are the people side. And if we can be able to have a better approach to that, if we can be able to manage those people decisions and do them better, then we can have a tremendous impact on improving the success of our founders and our startups. And Moshe was very much in that vein. It was also very intriguing when Moshe was talking about his test driving the founder. Seeing how the founder responds, putting them in stressful situations just to be able to interact, setting up a meeting with this investor. Are you willing to blow through some barriers on the way to it, or you want it to be easy? His seeing that as an echo of all sorts of other characteristics that the founder is going to have to bring to the table, and that this microcosm of the barrier to set up a meeting. I don't know if his now talking about it within the podcast is going to cause problems for that signal for him. Now founders know, oh, this is what he's doing when he's making it hard for me to set up a meeting with him. Let me just get through this and it'll be easier on me.
Yeah, to me, it sounded like they were talking about two different types of startups. It felt to me that, there's the initial, approach where it was the startup's got to be pretty baked and the chain has to be revealed and you have to sort of see it. And I think that approach is pretty strong to say, by the time I'm ready to put money in and my own LP's money in, I got to make sure that there's no real break in this chain, because that'll ultimately exacerbate. And by the time that rocket ship ends up in space, that small little ring will, blow up the ship. And to me, that feels like a much later, even within the world of VC, there's still nuances of stage. It feels to me that when you're in that space, you really need things to be a little bit more mature. And so when you're in the space of a little bit more of a mature VC company, you can really look under the hood, see if all the pieces are in place and if there is sort of a break somewhere. Whereas I think Moshe's approach was, a little earlier on, where he's expecting pivots, he's expecting things to not be fully figured out. He's expecting some of his entrepreneurs to not have figured out each link in this chain. And what he's looking for is something that is outside the document, right? He's looking for the resilience. He's looking for those intangibles that will allow him to determine whether or not in the future, when eventual crisis will hit, they'll endure. This reminds me very much like a football team. When you look for football players, there are these the free agent pickups that you pick up mid-year or at the end of the year, and the player, you sort of know their problems, you see and then you place them somewhere. Then there's the draft picks. The draft picks are a kid from college. You don't really know them, so you're looking for something very different. They got to play football, but you're really looking for the intangibles, their work ethic, their humility. So they're both, I found, to be star coaches with the same game, looking for very slight different types of players.
And I know it's very interesting. So a couple of big picture things. First, the sports metaphor is great. It's wonderful when you can be able to relate it to another domain, because that enhances and enriches our being able to get that perspective on it. The one that was coming to mind for me is drafting in baseball. They can draft out of high school or they can draft out of college.
Right.
But it also leads to a little bit different raw material, though. A lot of times, real stars are coming out of high school. It's the ones who aren't the stars who have to go to college to be able to prove themselves. So It might be, you have a little bit more information coming out of college, but also there might be a qualitative difference between the type of people who decide to come out at high school versus the ones who decide to come out there. But getting back into the entrepreneurial sector, and what you were highlighting a little bit is that each of these types of investors fits into a different stage of development. Yeah. And so early on in the startup, you're usually funding yourself. You're usually bootstrapping. You are the classic credit card stage of the startup when you are the one as the founder who is funding it. Then you can start looking at the friends and family funding, the people nearby to you. And we've tackled some of the things around the risks that introduces, the perils of tapping family and friends that we talk about also within co-founding with them, but also of taking their money. Then a next stage is often the type of angel investor like Moshe Neuman, the one who isn't socially connected to you per se, but is still investing his own money. And so that's the classic angel that would be doing it. And they also, as I'll talk a little bit later in one of these episodes, about the size of check that they're able to write. That's usually a much smaller check than the professional investors. And then a lot of times the founder will try to tackle, though with very small percentages who succeeded it, getting to the professional investors, the venture capitalists, corporate investors, and other things like that. The sizes of the checks are bigger, the stages they look at are bigger, but also the raw material they're evaluating is going to be different because of that. And so that's just to help people be able to place each of the types of investors when they come up into the stage of the development of the venture and the life cycle of what we've been talking about. Yeah. Another one of the things when we were talking about like Moshe and is evaluating the founders and stuff, very clear about his looking for a certain type of motivation. He is looking for the rich motivated founder. It's important that they should be willing to share the wealth. Yes. That's not just share the wealth with the investor, it's also share the wealth with the people in the venture. Are they giving equity to the other people there? Or are they keeping that and also decision-making to themselves? In some ways, the rich versus king test that we've talked about in the past, Moshe bringing that out very much. There also were some things in terms of the skills, in particular that Andrew was talking about, but then Kumesh also from the founder perspective, giving a different lens on it. Andrew, very much a bias towards second timers. That goes back to your theory, Charlie, about he's looking for the more developed, not just in the startup, but also second startup, third startup for those founders, but also prior sales experience as being the number one thing that he is looking for, the intangible, the going through no after no after no, getting a breakthrough to yes, and then finally being able to understand what's separated the yes from the no. The next time around, only after going through 2 no's before you get to a yes. All sorts of ways in which the skill building when it comes to sales was some big thing that he thinks is very much so. And when we got to Kumesh, he was talking about CEOs, it's fundraising all the time. That's a critical sales task. Being able to fundraise is the ultimate, if you will, sales task. And so he gave like a next level down in terms of the sales comment that Andrew had before that. There were also some stuff that. Yeah, go ahead.
Just to jump in a second, I think this is important for the people that are listening to really understand that when you're sitting in the room, I think whenever you're watching, there are the people that play and people that watch. right? And so, watching the game and playing the game is two entirely different experiences. And so I think those that are listening to this podcast may be a little bit of both and thinking about jumping into the game. Where I think the two things you just said that I sort of just want to pause and highlight here is, one, I don't think when you watch the game, do you understand and appreciate the level of fundraising. Like, I don't think when you read Steve Jobs' book or fall in love with the problem, not the solution, or the million entrepreneurial startup, everything that you can get your hands on, including the Eureka idea, I don't think people fully appreciate just the level of salesmanship, dealing with no's, rejection, and selling that needs to happen for anything to take place. We look back and say, well, Steve Jobs didn't have to sell anything. Yeah, he did a lot. Like, most of the time when we hear stories, what happens is it creates a selective memory in our minds that the majority of the entrepreneurial stories are told to us without the level of hours of fundraising or selling. And so it creates a misperception. And so when you have to go out and fundraise, or to say more market-wise, capital raise, when you got to do these things, it feels like there's something wrong, or there's something wrong with the product, or that's not what I signed up for. That's what you signed up for. And that's why lots of ventures fail. It's not that it's either you can't execute, but a lot of times the failure of a venture is just they just run out of cash. They just don't have enough money to get through the hard times because the founders never fully got the message that they have to go out and fundraise. And that really connects to the other point, which is, and Moshe and both of them were so on tune. And what's great about this podcast, and I hope people appreciate this, is being able to analyze people, right? Moshe, to me, was trying to get under these basic core skills. Andrew as well, but Moshe in particular, I think, at an earlier stage. And so what he was getting at with the desire to share was a recognition that you really don't build big startups if you're not sharing equity. Like, when you hold things to the vest, when you don't share your chips, it ends up translating later on in a lack of resources, whether it's resources in your employee class, because you will either have to pay them more, they'll leave because they don't have equity, or it's resources in your investor class because you're not willing to go out and make that next round. So really, what I want to make sure is clear is the level of just how much money, how important money is.
Okay, so one of the things, Charlie, that you were just teeing up has an echo from our first season when we talked about Tim Westergren with fundraising, and now he had to go through 200 plus no's and refer to it at fundraising as sequential disappointment. And right. Do you have what it takes to be able to do that when you head into the journey and make sure that you're up for being able to do that type of thing? Another one that struck me when it comes to like the founder characteristics that they were highlighting, not just in terms of the sales experience and the fundraising experience, but also the mindset about confidence versus learning. And there were some golden things that Andrew was talking about, that he's looking for well-reasoned but loosely held opinions. I thought that was a golden phrase.
I love that. We should talk about that in the next episode. We should definitely pause that. That was a brilliant. Andrew had a lot of like sort of brilliant nuggets that we should sort of expend a lot of time on, but that one in particular, I remember thinking to myself, that's great stuff.
Yep. And so teeing that up. And then the last thing is a little bit of a feel that from the investor perspective, there's more regret from the deals that you passed on than writing a bad check. And that balance of the two of those, and how you're able to battle the two of those. There's other investors that would strike it in the opposite way. You have venture capital firms that put up their anti-portfolio page. The deals we turned down, that Bessemer turned its thumb down on FedEx multiple times. And those kinds of things about the missed deal versus the badly done deal, type 1 versus type 2 errors with the investor realm was another very interesting thing that they were talking about.
Amazing. Okay, so thanks so much, Dean, for this. And for those who are tuning in, always send us questions at foundersdilemmaspodcast@gmail.com. Send us your questions, your thoughts, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Stick with us because this is actually a series of 3 parts where we're going to talk about this specific panel. So the next one, we're going to continue to delve in. So stick with us and we'll see you next time.